I feel like that's their way of like having an emergency out. Like if anything gets too hot, then like the teacher could just hit the red buzzer and be like, "Well, I don't want to do this. I'm done."
I think you're right. But like I said, look, it's never been tried before. I don't think it will succeed in court because it is so contrary to the spirit of the government's advice. Why are the government saying we're exempting the ideas from the remit of the Equality Act, only
Mm.
to have someone come along and say, aha, yeah, for students, fine, but for teachers, no, no, no. That it's restricted very tightly based on what teachers find emotionally comfortable. So it really is about prioritizing the emotional well-being of staff over the intellectual challenge of students.
Which is peculiar because we spend we've spent so many decades, the last 4 or 5, doing everything we can to wrap children in cotton wool until they're sort of 22, and suddenly they realize that the world is not just cotton wool, and they become an emotional wreck. Um, it's also kind of worrying because my mum was involved with schools in Cambridge for a while, and a long while. And from what she's told me, even back then, 70, 80% of the teachers were what we would call woke. Uh, so if we've got all these teachers that are, you can't sort of begrudge somebody a political opinion by any means. But like, I think if they're at the furthest ends of either of those opinions, then and a vast amount of them are, then that can become a problem.
Yeah, and it's counterproductive shielding students from ideas because it works in exactly the same way that anxiety does generally. Let's say that you're scared of driving and you avoid driving, you just get more and more scared of it. And the range of activities related to driving that you can undertake shrinks. It's the same with the world of ideas. If you
Mm.
try and shield people from things they find upsetting, their tolerance, their growth emotionally and intellectually just gets stunted. And that's
Mm.
what's being created. Students who are now, I suppose, seeing it in teachers as role models,
Mm.
not wanting to confront things that challenge their own preconceptions.
Yeah, most worrying. You're not filling me with positivity here, Will.
Like I said, it's a big principle at stake, but
Yeah.
the positive sign to it is that more and more people are becoming aware of it. I think there's been a lot
Yeah.
of sleepwalking into this state, and also people thinking it will blow over and naively hoping appeasement is the answer. But appeasement only emboldens these people.
Well, they don't appease anyone, do they? When did they ever appease any of their sort of enemies in air quotes? They never do.
No, they
They,
keep the
they,
pressure up constantly and they do it very effectively.
yeah, yeah. You have to respect them for that, most definitely. So, can you tell us about the actual um, topic and the information that got you on the front page of some of Europe's biggest newspapers?
Yeah, you won't believe it. It's stuff that 5 minutes ago wasn't even controversial. Like I said, 30-minute talk, over 40 academic references, all mainstream. And essentially, it's looking at the interesting fact, which has been termed in research the patriarchy paradox, that the more gender equality is pushed in a society, and we see this in the Western world's most developed countries, the more, paradoxically, men and women actually diverge. So if you give people equality of opportunity, they tend to actually choose very different things.
Hmm.
So it suggests that actually the opposite of what the social constructionists predicted is true. So society can try and mold men and women to be more and more similar. But the opposite happens. There seems to be something essentially different about them, something rooted in human nature and biology. So it's not a social construct. So starting from that, which is a viewpoint students don't really hear much, I went through some of the literature on what masculinity is and how some of the terms that have been described as toxically masculine by the American Psychological Association. So things like stoicism, dominance, competitiveness, aggression, have actually been valued throughout human history. So what we now call toxic has actually been seen as beneficial. And ironically enough, not only has it been beneficial, but women have selected men for it. Because one of the things evolutionary biology has to contribute to this debate is that men are the product of women's choices. So the sexes differ as a result of sexual selection, so not natural selection. You and I, as men, are the product of millennia of women's choices.
Yeah, good choices.
That's right.
Especially for you with that jawline.
what this offended people with, though, is that it means that what we call patriarchy is rooted in female biology.
Yeah.
It's not a social construct that men have sat down together and conspired with one another to produce to oppress women. Instead, women have selected physically powerful, psychologically dominant men who are competitive and aggressive and are going to be good at three main things. And the literature suggests that it's procreating, protecting, and providing. Yep. So women want to have babies. And
how many kids do you have, Will?
I've got 6 kids. So women want to have babies. They want someone who's going to provide for them while that happens, because being pregnant for 9 months is hard. You're not going to go out. If we go back to earlier times, let's imagine Stone Age, because although we've got all this wonderful technology, our actual brains and bodies are fundamentally the same as our Stone Age ancestors. So it's a strange disconnect between what's around us and then what we are internally. Yeah. If you're pregnant, especially towards the end of the pregnancy, you're not going to be going out on long-range hunting missions. You're not going to be straying far from home, gathering food. Same as well, when you've actually got a nursing baby, you don't want to be putting yourself in danger or the baby in danger. So women have selected men who are suited to the tasks that, to put it bluntly, they can't perform as well. And then we get what's called the traditional set of masculine virtues stemming from that. So we've got masculine biology, which is the result of what women have shaped. And then we think, well, okay, what kind of traits would a man need to have to make him exceed or excel in all these roles? And things like courage come up, things like honor, things like stoicism, psychological toughness. And again, it's odd that the things that have been especially important, whether it's in war or whether it's in hunting, for example, are actually the things that nowadays boys are told are worst about themselves, and they should be trying to reimagine. You hear this disturbing phrase, reimagine masculinity. Well, if only it were true that it were just something invented out of thin air and these people could easily reinvent it according to their own vision, then they'd have a great time. Everyone could be refashioned according to their vision of what a man should be. But the reality is that things aren't infinitely plastic. You can't twist it and morph it into whatever you want. There's a limit to what culture can do. Think of it as like a flower, which has got its roots in the soil. So masculinity is a flower with its roots in the soil of biology, and culture can water it and tend it and encourage it to grow. And that's what we do with the traditional expectations about chivalry, for example, and how men are supposed to be particularly protective towards women. It's far worse for a man to beat up a weaker man than it is for him. Sorry, it's far worse for him to beat up a woman than it is for him to beat up a weaker man.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all. Boys know that. Men know that. And you get even in prisons, for example, the honor codes.
Yeah, absolutely. I have, unfortunately, not myself, but I have very close-hand experience of those things. Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, at the end of the day, I imagine you can't really mess too much with biology, and as you say, we've had so long, evolution has just sort of taken so long to evolve this sort of perfect machine. And now we're just being told, no, 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 that's not what you want to be like. And here we are.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. I just look around the world and think, I I'll tell you what I really think. A lot of people are tend to conflate, I think fairly, the modern sort of woke movement, the cultural takeover, with the Marxist movements, and there are many many sort of reasons for that. But I look around the world and see other countries still behaving very much in the sort of age old way. So if you look at China, China are not reducing their empire; they're growing their empire, even physically, like by landmass. Excuse me, they're taking over countries. They're finding ways of moving into countries. They obviously have probably the most powerful hold in Africa at the moment. We know they're trying to build their route to Africa. Um, we know that we've seen what's been going on at the factories where the pay is sort of $2 a day, where they have the nets outside the factories, which could be looked at as similar to slavery. And then in Russia, Russia are obviously not shrinking their empire, they're growing their empire as well. And I look at the West and think that we're just the complete opposite. Like I just don't see any future. Do you?
interesting question.
Winston stopped writing, partly because he was suffering from cramp. He did not know what had made him pour out this stream of rubbish